Okay, well, it's 9 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. There's a couple of little housekeeping things to deal with first. I want to welcome all of you here. Um, this webinar series that you're involved with right now is technically part of the GroupWise Power Administrator Resource Series from Caledonia. In December, we started a new product at Caledonia called the GroupWise Power Administrator Resource. And really what it is a place for GroupWise administrators to come to be able to find out everything about GroupWise. I like to think of it as your one-stop shop for GroupWise. So there's information on upgrading to GroupWise 2014. There's group information on just general GroupWise administration. We have how-to videos. We do these webinars. Our webinars, we typically had planned on doing one per month, but right now in the push towards GroupWise 2014, we're actually doing one a week. And since we were doing 4 for February, we decided to invite the public to come to this one today so that you can kind of get an idea of what we do in our webinars and how this resource might be useful for you. At the end of this webinar, we are going to draw a prize. We're going to give a 3-month membership to someone who is on the webinar. And I will just kind of, um, I have a whole list of everybody who's here. I'll just kind of scroll up and down and close my eyes and click. And whoever I click on is going to be who wins this 3-month membership. And if for some reason you're already a member, because this webinar has both members and non-members on it, if some reason you're a member, I will go ahead and extend your membership for 3 months. I think that's only fair. Everybody who's here gets a chance, whether you already paid or not. Then there will also be a coupon code. Valentine's Day is coming up, so we all love GroupWise, and I'm going to give you a coupon code to use through Monday if you like what you see and decide you want to join us. So I'll type that in the box here at some point so that you can see what the coupon code is all about. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be available to view once we get it up on the web. So I will also be sending out an email to all of the registrants from the webinar to let you know how you can go back and view it again. And of course, there'll be people who aren't here and they'll be able to see it that way too. All right, so I'm going to get started here and introduce Paul LaMontagne to you. Paul is with Lam Tech Consulting, formerly of Novell. Paul and I have worked together for a long time, and recently we went into partnership to work on this GroupWise Power Resource. And Paul is doing a lot of the work on videos and some of the webinars, and he is really the expert on upgrading the GroupWise client. So he is going to be in charge of showing you how to do that today. He has a number of ways to upgrade, just the auto update, ZCM, setup IP. There will be some times when there's a bit of a lag, simply because it takes a while to do the upgrades of the clients and things like that. There is a questions box, and I really encourage you to ask questions. If you have questions as we go along, we are going to hold the questions. In the past, I've kind of interrupted and answered questions as we go, but because there will be some specific dead time during this presentation while the client is updating, we'll hold the questions for that time, and then we'll answer a number of questions in a row while the client is doing its updating, and then get back to the upgrade once that happens. So anytime you have any questions, just ask them in the questions box and they will show up, and I can monitor those as we go along, and then we will answer them when Paul gets to a pause. So without any further ado, here's Paul LaMontagne.
All right, good morning, everybody. Again, thanks, Danita. Again, so we're going to take a look here at the GroupWise 2014 client and what's the biggest pain point for most people doing the upgrades. I mean, the upgrades are pretty straightforward. When we talk about upgrading the back end, we talk about upgrading, the services on the server. Though, even though with GroupWise 2014 we are introducing a new architecture, and with the GroupWise admin service being installed on every box that's going to hold components. So a little bit of a difference there. But the biggest pain point really is, obviously touching every workstation that holds the GroupWise client. And I mean, I can tell you the number of times I've gone to customer sites, and the back ends are usually typically updated, but the clients are always the last thing to go, and they just take forever to do. So hopefully this seminar will help you get rid of some of that, alleviate some of those issues you have with going to the client, visiting the customer, because they always complain about downtime and you're bothering me and all that kind of stuff. Users being typical users. So with GroupWise 2014, the upgrade process has been redesigned at some level, and it really is now just part of the client options, and I'll show you that in a second here. So obviously this is our Caledonia site for the membership site, so we just wanted to show you that. So I'm going to bring up my VMs. So here I've got a couple of VMs. I'm working off my laptop here. So I've got an OES server that I'm going to play with. I've already got GroupWise installed. If you haven't seen any of the GroupWise install as of yet, once you install either a Linux box or a Windows server, because NetWare is no longer supported since GroupWise 2012, you'll get a nice little shortcut for the admin console. So I'm going to bring up that. Then we'll log into the admin console. So the default name when you actually either upgrade your existing system to GroupWise 2014 or install a fresh one is, it will ask you for the name of an admin user or super user within the GroupWise environment. For those of you who have been around for a long time, like Danita, because I'm not as old as she is, you'll know that there was an admin account built into the old ad.exe, and I know I'm going to pay for that dearly later. So the account default name is admin, which I don't like using. So part of my best practices is to rename that account to something different. So I just call it GWC admin for the GroupWise console administrator, right? I really don't want to have any confusion with maybe your admin account for your directory services, right? So I just kind of like having a different one there. So I'm just going to log in here, and again, this is what we'll end up seeing for our admin console. So if you haven't seen that, it's a nice, web-based tool. You're logged in and you see the actual system overview with, I'm connected to the SLC domain. I see that up here. If you have multiple domains, you can connect to and select other domains. And it uses the web interface and the REST services of the web to transfer you over to that other box without having to have a map drive and all the things that we used to have with a Novell client, an eDirectory, and all those kind of things. So some really nice things have been done with this interface. A lot of thought has gone into that. All of these are hyperlinks, so any one of them is a link, and I can connect to each and every one of them, right? So the upgrade process, right? So we've got a couple of different methods. We can talk about auto update. So auto update is the process of you log in with a GroupWise client, and it then does a comparison of certain values within the local machine's registry versus what the post office or what the user account thinks, or even a domain, because we actually now have the ability to do this either at the user level, post office level, or domain level. So again, it's very much because it's part of the client option, so we can pick at what level we want to do this. I'll typically do the post office level. So at some point, it compares the values of two registry entries to see if there is a higher version available at the server level, and then it could initiate an upgrade. So that's one method, auto update. Another method is the setup IP method, and the setup IP method is where you will create an executable which will then, once you send that executable over to your customer, the client, he runs that executable. So hopefully, you get them to save that locally. And again, how you get it to them can vary. You can send it to an email. You can point them to a web server to download the file or initiate it from there. And he runs that application, and then it goes and downloads a compressed version of the client to the local machine, and then kicks off the upgrade. A third method would be use some sort of desktop management software. So something like ZenWorks Configuration Manager from Novell, which allows us to create an application bundle and then we can then push that bundle to our workstations to do the upgrade as well. So we're going to go over those three different methods here. Also, when we talk about auto upgrade, there's a couple of different methods to do it, and we'll talk about that as I get into detail. So at this point, I'm really ready to go. I've got a Windows workstation as well. It's a Windows 7 machine, and it's running GroupWise 8 right now. So I also have a snapshot running GroupWise 2012. I've got Windows XP box. I've got a Windows 8 box as well, all running both versions of the clients. Or I think my Windows 8 actually only running 2012. We can do upgrades on any one of those boxes, and it's identical. The process is identical on every one of the boxes, so there's really no difference. So I just decided to pick a Windows 7 box here. So let's go back to our Linux box here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select my post office, and let me take a look here just to verify. So we've got some users. So we've got Danita, we've got Mike and Marie and myself and Sandra here. So we've got 5 users all in the SLCPO and the SLC DOM containers. So they're ready to be upgraded and used. So go back to that post office. So when I list on the navigation panel the post offices, it'll list all of the post offices throughout the system. All right, so I'm going to select my SLCPO one. Takes me into the configuration. So very similar. So again, if you haven't seen this, so very similar to what you used to see in console 1, right? So we've got tabs, right, and we've got different sections within one particular tab. Might have had multiple windows to it, or multiple tabs on that the arrow, the drop-down arrows, right? So settings, client settings. So here, if I actually select the client option button here, it's going to go to client options, and we now notice down here at the very bottom, client auto update. So if I select that one, it's really simple. All I really need to do is tick this box, and once I select OK, it's now got the same equivalent as saying I'm going to do the checks, right? So the auto update process is available. The auto update process is available, and it's going to now, it has the ability to do the comparison. And at this point, who will deliver the client to the workstation? The post office agent will deliver the client to the workstation. So I have some mixed feelings about that, only because what else is the post office doing, right? Also, the post office is can be a busy little guy, right? Delivers mail, does, executes rules, does maintenance, all kinds of things. So do I also want it pushing out the client? So one of the other options we have here is an auto update URL. So this allows us to point to a web server. So we would have to copy the installation files over to the web server. And then from there, it becomes the web server will push the client down to the workstation, as opposed to the post office agent doing it. So we can offload some of the tasks to a web server as opposed to having the POA do it. I think that's a much better way of doing it. We also used to have some files, right? We used to have the setup.cfg file, and we had that would allow us to customize the install. We still have that file available to us, but we also have some of the entries have been removed and placed into here. So in that setup.cfg section where we had the auto update section, there was the do we want to force an update? Do we want to allow for grace logins? Do I prompt until updated? So these were some settings that were available in that setup.cfg file. While the setup.cfg file is still available. In fact, let me go. I need to connect my my media, which is just need to connect up my CD drive here. There we go. While we wait for that to connect up. So once my CD is connected, if I go to the client, and there is that folder. So if I want to use the setup.cfg file in conjunction, I'm going to just edit this with gedit. And we'll see, if I bring this down to center here, we'll see that so that auto update section has been removed from that setup.cfg file. one of my issues is they left this part here, the show setup. So do I want to have the dialog? So I still, oops, have to edit this file and just not have the dialog box and have a totally non-interactive install with my customers, which is what I really want, right? Another one of my favorites I'll do here is we install the GWCheck application, but we don't enable it, and that is for if you're using a cache client or a remote client, we want to be able to do standalone GWChecks on our box. So obviously I can't save this file because I'm on the CD, right? So let me just close out saving here. So initially, I'm going to take this file and I am going to have to copy it over to another directory. So let me just copy this file. So in our system, when you install a GroupWise system, traditionally opt, novell, GroupWise, we typically had the agent directory. We now have this new admin directory. Well, admin directory is more for the administration. There is a command line utility that's within that folder. That will be the subject of another webinar that we do. But under our agents directory, we now have a data folder that's there. And in that data folder, there's a client folder, and there's a setup folder, and then there's the Win32. And that's where it has all of the files for doing the install. It actually leverages setup IP rather than using the Win32 directory and the full client. You'll notice that in this directory we'll see some setup IP files. So the setup IP.fil file is here, the language file, right, they're here. In GroupWise 2012 and below, the software.ini file has been renamed to version.ini. So if I actually edit that, we'll see that here's where it's got the build number. So 4859 is the build number for this particular build. Now, to take advantage of using that setup.cfg file in the Win32 folder, you have to create another folder. And it has to be called Win32, just like in previous versions. So what they've done here is at some point in the future, there's speculation that we might have different versions of the client. So today, the Windows client is a 32-bit application. At some point, it might become a 64-bit application. So that's why when they did this, they created the setup Win32 folder, and potentially somewhere in the future there might be a Win64 or an X64, whatever they want to call it. So just like in previous versions, underneath the client directory, right, we would create a Win32 folder, and that's where we would store the setup.cfg file. So once I have that file there, then I can edit this file and change this to, do I want dialogues to be no? Whoops. No, and do I want my GWCheck enabled? And now I can save that file. And I can exit out of here, and we'll see that that file is there. If I return, or actually let me open up another, just easier. If I go back to the file system, and if I go to my go to the client directory, my CD. So in the client directory, under Win32, just like where it used to be, there is another file called setup.ini. I'm just going to copy that and then paste it over here. And the setup.ini file would allow us to disable the language dialog box for the install anywhere application. So they use the install anywhere application packager for the Windows client. So if I'm going to open this with gedit, obviously you can open this with VI or gedit, whatever floats your boat. And I'm going to say on the enable language dialog box, I'm going to configure that to be no. All right, I'm going to save that and quit out of here, and now I've got those two files. So in a auto update, it would now also recognize the setup.cfg file and the setup.ini file, and then it really will become a truly non-interactive install. So at this point, the only thing that's left to do, I'm going to just minimize these windows here, is so if I've enabled the auto client updates, that just says allows the post office agent to do it. Forcing the update, great. Allow you to log in 3 times with the old client, and on the 4th one will force you to do the upgrade or give you no access at all. I could click OK, and that saves automatically, so I don't actually have to hit the save button. Now, if I go take a look, we used to take a look in Console 1 and take a look at what was called the software version. So you'd have to go to Tools, go to Record Enumeration, find the area by ID, and then go and take a look at the software version. So it's actually a lot easier with the new interface. So under Diagnostics, there's actually two options here, and one of them is Display Object. So if I display Object, that will go here. If I list down, go a little lower, I'm looking here for software version. Since it's the, I just reinstalled the server this morning to make sure that it was a clean install. I've got software version of 0, and that is referred to as the bump number within the old software distribution directory under Console 1. So, and it was actually called software version, but we refer to that as the bump number, right? And we also just saw the build number, right? We saw the build number to be 4859, and we got a software bump number of 0. Now, in order to trigger an update, we have to tell the system. In GroupWise 2012 or less, we used to go to Console 1, go into the software directory management, highlight the software distribution directory, and then click on the update and tick the box that said force an upgrade, right? Forced update, so it would force the comparison. So what that does is that bumps the software version number. That's hence how we gave it the bump name. So it bumps the software version by a value of 1. So typically that would trigger the comparison and the look from the workstation level. So now if I go to do that, to increase the bump number, you got to go to the More button. I know it's a little cryptic here. It's More, Client Auto Update, and then the settings for Client Update is enabled, so it picks up that update has been enabled from the client options, but it says, okay, we don't have a URL set, so the POA distributes to GroupWise client software instead. Let's move this over here, right? So if I have a URL, then it becomes the web server. Has a last update, not. If I click on Modify Settings, it actually takes you to the client update, auto update options under the client options. So if I say Trigger Update, so it's going to reset, and it's going to increase that bump number. So if I go back to my diagnostics, and if I go to Display Object, if I scroll down here, we will see that the software version has now been incremented by a value of 1. All right. So now I really can go to the workstation, and if I start off, let's take a look at the registry. So I'm going to reg edit, and it's under the HKey local machine software, but since this is a 64-bit Windows box, you got to go to the WoW 6432 node. If it's a 32-bit Windows 7, it would just be under the software. And then we find Novell, GroupWise. Under the GroupWise heading, let me just make this a little bigger here and expand this out this way. So we get the build number. So at 4578, so it's obviously less than our 4859. And under that, we go to Client 50, and we say our new software bump number is 0 here. So we've got a lower value for the build number and a lower value for the bump number. So now, if all I need to do is, if I log in, this should upgrade, right? I'm going to do this, but I think there's an issue with this version. I've actually tried this a couple of times, and I'm just going to log in here.
Drum roll, please.
The very first time I log in, pardon?
I said drum roll, please.
Yeah, as I log in the first time, we'll see what's happening. There's been an issue with the POA pushing it with the later builds. The working from the web server works every time, and I actually prefer that. Okay, so because I installed a brand new system, I've got the certificates, so I'm just going to accept the certificates. Oh, look at that. It's actually working, right? So,
Yay!
yay.
Love it when a plan comes
Yeah, I know. I
together
love when a
like
plan
that.
comes together. So there's my little update, right? So here's, because I said force update with Grace logins. It says there's a new GroupWise software available. You have 3 Grace logins. Do you before you must update? Do you want to update now? Yes or no? So if I say no, it just goes into GroupWise 8. If I say yes, it all goes and starts the login. So let's say yes to this, and everything being, in a perfect world, if everything works, and I did sacrifice a chicken this morning to the demo gods, so it should then at that point kick off the install, but I should not be asked any questions about the install. I'll know right away. As soon as I say yes to this, you'll see what happens is it actually leverages setup IP, and it actually generates its own, and it's going to download. Now the POA is going to download the software to my workstation, and we will then see it start the install. And can't find. Okay. Yeah, so I know there was having some issues with this version of it. So the copy IP, and I'm logged in as administrator, so that should have worked. All right, so it obviously doesn't work, so it goes ahead and does this one, right? So epic fail, right? I've actually wrote this up as a bug. But let me go back here. And we'll go back to our client options, and we're going to go to our client auto update. What I'm going to do is put in the URL. HTTP S, and it's da-oes.digitalairlines.com/GW client slash win32. So that's the location where the web server is going to deliver it from. And this is still the best practice, because I really don't want my POA delivering it. And even internally, we were talking about this, and this is how the developers really want people to do this, is through the web server. So I'm going to select OK to that. Before I go and do the bump again, we are going to have to go and now manage and distribute the or configure the web server so that it can actually deliver the files, because by default is the web server cannot do that. So I'm opening up a terminal, srv this slash www slash htdocs. That's the default directory where the files typically are. So I'm going to make a directory and call it GW client.
And so, Paul,
Okay.
you're really launching here into how to do the new simplified setup IP stuff, right?
Correct. It's basically a simplified setup IP, but it's still what's going to happen is every user logging in. This is basically doing a setup IP and auto update combined together, whereas setup IP is still a separate entity if you want to do that.
Right, you can roll
So
out, you can just send a URL to people and say, go do this. If you put this in the way Paul's doing it right now, it basically is using a web server to do your auto update for you rather than sending the files through the POA. And
correct.
as Paul says, that's really a cleaner and less it has less overhead for your post office agent, for one thing, right?
Yep.
So if you do it that way rather than just the old standard way that GroupWise always did it, in pulling the client down through the quote software distribution directory, which really doesn't exist any longer. It's in that data directory now, under the OPT files. Um, you're going to avoid having the post office agent have to handle all of those requests Monday morning when everyone comes in. Instead, it'll be pulled off to your web server.
Right. And but my issue is still having, if I have a very large post office, I'm still going to be tasking the bandwidth of my network by doing that. Right? If I've got a 3,000 user post office, and come Monday morning after me doing the upgrade on the weekend and setting this all up, 8 a.m. 3,000 people still trying to do the GroupWise upgrade. There's
Exactly,
still
which is where
3,000 people
auto
pulling it from
update
the web
really
server.
fails when you start
So,
getting into large organizations. The auto update can be a real
correct.
overhead killer if you have a large organization, and that's where setup IP in its purest sense works the best, because you can then just send out the URL to groups of people and roll it out more slowly that way.
Correct. All right, so now that I've got that GW client directory, I need to copy the Win32 folder over. So I'm going to go back to my file system, and this is, I just, obviously the GUI interface is the kind of the easiest. Op, Novell, GroupWise, agents, data, client, setup. Now I need to take the entire Win32 directory, so I'm going to copy that. Right, and then I'm just going to paste that over to my file system, SRV, www, htdocs, GW client, and paste it right there. And by taking that entire directory, I end up with, let's finish copying here. It's 75 megabytes worth of info. And I end up with that Win32 directory with the 2 files I need. I'm going to just do a quick check here. cdgw client, win. I've been finding lately as I edit those files, and this causes some grief. Even though I open the file up with gedit and I've closed the file, it leaves the temporary files there. I have found that that has been causing some grief and actually causing some installs to fail, so that might have been part of the reason why it didn't work in the other example. It did get the CFG file, or it did actually, it didn't get the CFG file. It got the configuration of the Grace updates, but it didn't download the files. So let me just do an RM of setup.cfg. And I don't know if that's just my particular install that I've been having issues here, because even if I use VI, I've been noticing it's been keeping these temporary files around. So those files are now gone. So that's all there. So I've got everything in place. So I've got, here's the location. So the default location is srv.www.htdocs. So that's the URL, right, for my server. And then and the GW client Win32 is where all of those files exist for doing the install. And here's where the copy IP file is. So, it complained about the copy IP, but there it is. So I'm not quite sure why it didn't get that file to do the install. So it's saying it didn't download it to the temporary location. Because typically what will happen, you'll see it kick off the setup IP where it actually downloads the files. And we never got that when we tried to do the update there. So let's minimize this again. So back to my client options. Let's just take a look at the client auto update. So again, the URL, HTTP, HTTPS. It's an OES server, so I can do HTTPS. Again, still the same environment there, so make sure that that's saved. Let's go back to our object here to make sure that we've got a software is still version 1. And let me go back to the Windows XP box here. Let's check our registry. I have noticed that it actually does bump the number. Okay, it didn't even get to that. So it did not bump the number there. I'm logged in as somebody with administrator rights to the box, because you still need administrator rights to the box to do the install. Yes, I am logged in as admin. Okay, just making sure. And go back to here. Now I need to let me increment that bump number one more time. So it actually, now it's got the URL, right, for where. So notice it filled it in with the server name, right? Well, actually, I did that. Trigger the update. Display the object. Let's go back to software version. Now it's at version 2. And let me it did save it, but just a precautionary. Now let's see what happens. Again, if I log in, it should notify me. Oh, no, it won't. This won't work. I only did one half. I did not configure the web server. It's not going to get the files. If I say yes, it's going to fail. At some point, it should fail to download the files. Yeah, it's going to fail to download the files because I didn't configure the web server to allow for access to the files.
Maybe you did it in your sleep, Paul.
Maybe I did.
Or setup IP, like I said, it has a very simplified new setup. Maybe
Yeah,
it's just so simple now that Paul can even do it in his sleep.
yeah.
If this actually starts the install and we don't have to abort and start over, then we'll start answering some of these questions that are on here. But
Yeah,
we'll give it a
that's
second to
fine.
make sure that we're
Yeah,
actually moving forward. And when you're working in VMware with um, 15 VMs open, things go a little slowly.
yeah.
I'll go ahead and start answering some of these. I think Paul has mentioned that yes, you do need administrative access. That's one of the questions we've had here a couple of
Hmm.
times. And if correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but it seems to me that that's one thing that the ZCM install can handle for you,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, the
So
ZCM
if that's
install
an issue and you
yeah,
have ZenWorks, then you can get by that because the ZCM installer will be able to install it. But if you're just relying on auto update or setup IP, the user does need to have administrative rights.
yeah, absolutely. The in ZCM we will see this when we do that section right after this. Is that you as the bundle you say I want to perform the action as a level uh, system level user. So
Then another one of the questions is if you bump a version for the auto update and a machine already has the most recent version. We got the language though.
yeah, so that means it didn't download the setup IP and the setup the setup CFG file and the setup INI file, and that's the problem with the web server.
Okay.
It will download and do the client update, but it does not download the files within the Win32 folder.
Okay.
So that's where you have to configure the web server to allow it to distribute the files. So
All
which is
right.
I'm going to cancel out and let's go back to there and let's do that. So on a web server, it uses, and the easiest thing is just to go through here. Under the file system, it's etc Apache 2, so the Apache 2 folder. There's a file called httpd.conf. I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to grab a section. I don't want to edit this particular file. The reason is that if you upgrade the server, this file gets overwritten by any updates. So anything you put in here potentially will not get it potentially has the ability to get overwritten. I'm just looking for the section where it's going to show me my files. And here it is. So forbid access to entire file system by default. That's the default. So right from the root, it says deny from all. So I'm just going to grab this. I'm going to copy that. And I can close this file now. File exit, quit. And under this folder, there's a folder called conf.d. So the conf.d folder is basically a folder that will allow you to include other files. So right now there's a couple in here. So I'm going to create a document. I'm going to call this, I just call it web access, or yeah, I call it web access for lack of a better. It's really not web access in the GroupWise sense, but it's access from the web for the web server. So I just call it webaccess.conf. So, oops, not here. I'm going to open this with gedit, and I'm just going to paste that in there. A couple of things I'm going to change in here, obviously, is the directory. So it's the srv, www, htdocs, and gw client. And I just leave it at gw client. I don't go the rest of the way. It'll pick up the rest. And then here I go, options indexes. This is what actually allows it to view the files in that folder. And my order here is I'm going to say allow, then deny. And here, who's allowed to access it, I'm going to say allow from all. Right, and I just save that. I'm going to quit out of there. I'm going to open up a browser. I am going to restart the Apache web server. So it's RC Apache 2. I do a stop. And I typically will restart Tomcat as well. And since this is being an OES server, it's Novell Tomcat 6. And then I start it up. Some people say you don't have to redo the Tomcat, but I've found I typically do both. And it ends up typically working. And I do that. So let's minimize that. So now I've got the files there. Let's go back to our workstation. Let's just check the registry for the numbers. Regedit. It's still a software bump because I canceled out, so nothing's been. Let's just double check, make sure. All right. And so now those files should also download. I'm going to say should and supposed to, because you know how things always work out when you want to do a demo. We should get the prompt again. Now it might say only 2 available ones because I canceled out. All right, still 3 Grace logins. Update yes. Now it's downloading the files.
Okay, one of the questions we have here is if you bump a version for the auto update and a machine already has the most recent version, will it attempt to reinstall over the same version? And really what you have those 2 numbers that work together. So the bump number says, I need to look, and the build number says, what do I have? So the bump number will make it go look, but if you have the current build number, it will not launch the update. Where you see this happen sometimes, where you can see this in action sometimes, is in the old GroupWise where the software distribution directory was somewhere where users didn't have access to it. They would get that really, kind of interesting error that said, there may be new software, but you don't have access to it. And what that meant was, you have a different bump number than I think you're supposed to have, but I can't check the build number. So I can't do anything. So the bump number is what makes the client look, and the build number is what makes it decide whether or not it will upgrade. So if you have the right build number, even if you have a different bump number, you're okay. It won't try it again. Does that make
Right.
sense?
So, and there you go. So you may have seen the install. So now notice there's no questions asked about the language for the dialog boxes for the installer, and then it auto started with, and it is showing the dialog boxes, or it's not showing the dialog boxes for questions. It's showing the progress bar, but it's not showing the dialog boxes. So
Right. And
now it
I find
did.
the progress bar to be pretty important because otherwise,
Yeah.
there was a way you could make it totally silent back in the old days without the, and if you don't do anything, then the user thinks something's totally broken because it just
Right.
kind of takes a long time for GroupWise to open. So you
Right.
probably want at least the progress bar.
Right,
loading
and
up.
I've asked, and having to go and do this setup.cfg file for really what is essentially modifying one line really annoys me.
Yeah.
I begged the developers to change that, and I said, like really realistically, you brought in three, the auto update section, you brought that in. I said there's really the two lines that were additional, being for the showing of the setup, those three options, and the the GW check application. Like we have the real estate on the screen to be able to add those in there, and they said, oh, probably we'll get to that in SP1. So hopefully that'll eliminate the need for the setup.cfg file, and hopefully we'll do something about the setup INI as well. That was um, so again. So it actually takes about 10 minutes to do an upgrade. It really isn't a quick process. That's why we really like having the progress bar. The experience, whether the post office does it itself and or um, the POA doing it is identical, except obviously who's delivering the files. But the experience will be, from the end user perspective, identical. Like I said, it failed on the POA doing it, but it's working here with the web server doing it. Uh, it also might be a function of the VMs as well, because I actually have this working on my live production system, and I've tested every way, and they all work. So, and I just for the life of me can't figure out what I've done differently on my VM that it won't have the POA push it. So I'm gonna own up to that. So are there any other questions in there, Dana, while this is going?
Yeah, okay, so we have a couple. One was, couldn't you just symlink that directory out of the data directory to the web server? And while technically you can, you would have to make sure that the user running Apache would have access to those directories under there, and it's not a big install. So I would say that rather than having to, make special arrangements for your Apache server, I have actually symlinked, NSS volumes for my for one web server I did that was doing photos so that it could just grab photos off of this NSS volume. But it's a little more complicated. So unless you're really an Apache guru and want to be messing around with that, it's a lot simpler just to copy that client directory over and and let
Right.
that do it. So while in theory, yes, it would be tough. For a very large installation, would you dedicate a web server for this? It and this goes in hand with a different question. So let's answer these together. One says, can we choose to deploy the client to one user or a group of users? If you are using this option that Paul just showed you, the auto update, everybody gets it. There would be ways to do it if you could push registry entries down to change the bump number for certain people so that you could do it that way. But if you have the tools to push registry entries down, you probably have the tools like ZCM or something to actually deploy the software through ZCM. And then, yes, indeed, you can do it by user or by group. Setup
Well,
IP also would allow you to do that simply in the fact that you could send the URL out to, roll the URL to go get the client to users a few at a time. So,
right, but it does allow you to configure this at the user level, the post office level, or domain level within here. So technically, yes, you can do it, but it's still, if you do, it's user post office domain. It's not minor. I don't think, unless
no,
the
I don't
groups.
think you can do it with
I
groups.
don't think we can do it with groups. We don't. I don't actually have a group. So let me create a group test, and I have not tried this. So your mileage may vary. Yeah, there is no client options for the group. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's basically going to be user post office. So it's either you're going to micromanage and do user by user by user, which no, or it's a post office, right? So yeah, so not necessarily the the most intuitive. So again, my issue with this again is, in a relatively small environment, a couple hundred users. If I get, it depends on what time everybody comes in the morning. They can go ahead and do the auto update. Having several, hundred users do this, or several thousand users do this all on a Monday morning, yeah, it's going to test my bandwidth, right? So this is going on. It's finished. Again, I'm going to go in here and just play with my properties here. Slash u dash question mark, and launch this thing off.
And we
And
see our
notice the
new
nice,
red icon, yes.
yes, we're back to being Novell Red, Pantene 243. And if I log in, GroupWise, and we'll see, here is the new GroupWise, right? So voila, let me just do that there we go. So, and if I go help, about, then we'll see GroupWise 2014. So it was the worst kept secret there was, so what we're going to call this thing, right? And there, 1400, and there it is, right? So pretty straightforward. Another way of doing this, setup IP. So we're actually, it looked very similar to doing setup IP. It leveraged all of doing setup IP to do this push now, which is about time that they've done that. And so now what I've got here, if I actually go to my server, so I've got a Samba share that goes to the Linux server that allows me to do this from Windows, because in order to create the setup IP executable, it's a Windows application that you need to run. So I'm going to go here. So again, under that agents, data, client, setup, okay, I saw the file earlier. Win32, sorry, in the Win32 folder. Here's the copy IP, and here's the write IP application, right? That's what you need to run. So somebody asked earlier a question about, can I set up a different web server? Yeah, absolutely. You can have, you can put this on any web server you want, right? You put the URL in the auto update, sorry, in the auto update URL. You put the URL in, so it doesn't matter where that web server is. It doesn't have to be on, obviously, on your production server. It could be a standalone web server to do that. In fact, if we actually go to setup IP, we can actually have 5 different web servers listed, and it does a top bottom, which, if I'm going to put 5 in there, I'm going to say choose an IP address at random, so it allows it to randomize which one it's going to do. So here, I'm going to go in and change the URL, and again, I don't need the 7181 because that's the post office port. So da-oes.digitalairlines.com, because I'm going to say leverage the web server, because I did copy everything to the web server. If I leave it at that port 7181, this actually allows me to create setup IP and have the POA push it. And I really don't want that to happen. I want the post office, I want the web server to push this down. So again, HTTP, that or S, either one. So what do I want? Do I want to download the files to a temporary directory on the workstation or to a specific directory? And then if I say specific directory, I can name it, delete the install files, download the new or updated files, etc. So really straightforward. I'm just going to just say to a temporary directory, click OK, and it's going to generate the setup IP executable. Okay, so now I need to take that file and I need to get that file to my users. So let me go back to the OES box. So a couple of different ways of doing that. I could simply email it to other users. I'm going to just go and grab that file now that I have it. Opt, Novell, GroupWise, agents, data, client, setup, Win32. So setup IP .exe, take this file, I'm going to copy this file, and I'm just going to bring it to my web server. And Novell, whoops, not there, sorry, htdocs, group GW client, and I'm going to place it in that GW client directory. So when I was on my, when I configured the web server for access, I said go to the GW client directory and it'll pick up the rest of it. So now, if I go to a browser, and here's my web server. So now if I go to HTTP, and if I go da-oes.digitalairlines.com/GW client, I go to that folder, I now see that. So this is the URL that you can send your users to say, go there, and then go run this setupip.exe. Have them download it. Once it's downloaded, I can say, go run that. And because it now has all the language files available to it, it'll ask you what language. The default one was English. And if I click OK, it's now going to do what? Download the client and upgrade it. Right? Or download the client and install it the very first time if there is no client on that workstation. So this is a way of getting the client out there as well. We're already well into our time, so I'm going to not do this install just to that, but that's just another way of doing it, right? And again, I'm just going to cancel out.
And I want to point out while he's doing that I realize some of you may have expected this to be an hour webinar. We're gonna go ahead and continue and do the ZCM. So if you can hang out with us and want to do that, that's fine. If for some reason you need to leave, this is being recorded, and we will put it on our YouTube channel so that you can get to it. I'll send out an email to everyone where it is so you can come back to get it. I do want to point out we have a coupon code, and I've just stuck it into the chat. It's LoveGW 2014. That coupon code is good until Monday, the 17th. It's a Valentine's weekend code for you, and it will give you a 15% off for the first 10 users who want to join the Power Administrator site with an annual membership. And after the first 10, it'll drop to 10%, but it'll be good till Monday. But we do want you to stick around if you can, because Paul wants to show you the ZCM stuff. But if for some reason you can't stay, this will all be recorded and you can come back and just watch the end of it again later.
All right, so like I said, I'm not going to install that. If you have questions, now's the time to post them, because I actually do have to close believe it or not, I actually have to close my my server here so I can start up the ZCM server. I am working off my workstation, I said, so I only have 8 gig of RAM, so it takes quite a bit of RAM to run the ZCM server. So we'll just
one of the questions is, can 2014 clients be used against a 2012 post office? No. 2012 clients can be used against a 2014 post office, but GroupWise clients are never backward compatible. You can't use a newer client against an older post office. Will my upgrade book be covering using ZCM? Absolutely. And Paul, by the way, is a co-author on the upgrade guides this time. So, you know, everything he's been talking about here today will be in there, and he will make sure that all the ZCM stuff is perfect, because he is, like I say, the guru on that. Yes, we're talking about you could leverage setup IP with a deployment package and get the files from a web server like Paul just did, and that's exactly what setup IP really is all about, is to
right. And setup IP allows you to then, you know, direct people to the URL on a schedule and say, you know what, I'm going to give it to, you know, this group of people, this department, you know, today. In 2 days, I'll give it to a different department, so that I can have, you know, a more controlled rollout of the GroupWise upgrade, as opposed to, you know, Monday morning everybody comes in and auto update kicks off and sends it to all 3,000 users of that post office, right? Which would just, you know, obviously kill your bandwidth, and your network guys would just, you know, kill you, right, for doing that. So auto update is great for again, the smaller departments, the smaller post offices, those kind of things. And once you start getting, I would think out of the, uh, I would say more than 200 users, I would really, really be skeptical about using auto update. I would either use straight setup IP or go to a desktop management piece of software. I've been involved with some really large scale deployments. GroupWise 2012, I worked on one of our lighthouse, when I was with Novell, one of our lighthouse for SP2 when we were doing the coexistence, is I needed to get 28,000 users upgraded to GroupWise SP1 before we went ahead and did things. So we used, believe it or not, we actually used Intel LANDesk. They didn't have ZCM, but they had Intel LANDesk, and we worked it out. And in the span of 4 weeks, we had 28,000 workstations successfully upgraded with a failure rate of about 0.5%. And the failures weren't because it didn't do the upgrade. It was failures because people turned off the machines weren't turned on, so they didn't get the push. So it's going to power on this box now. Also, let's see. I'm going to reset the VM here and go to a GroupWise. I have to go here to a GroupWise 2012. And it has to be a workstation that's registered in the ZCM zone. So, I mean, obviously, if you don't understand ZCM, ZCM is a desktop management. So there is an agent component on the workstation that basically the workstation is registered into what we refer to as the ZenWorks zone. And so this workstation is now registered in the zone, so it's available to have software pushed to it. So there is an agent component that has to exist on the workstation. So I've got different scenarios, whether with GroupWise 8 client, a GroupWise 12 client. So I've got a GroupWise 12 on that client. Let's just wait for this box to come up before I launch that. So again, if there's any other questions, we can field
Yeah,
those.
a question was asked if there are any guidelines for storage space requirements and server RAM on a GroupWise system. Your storage space requirements are, that's as variable as just about any GroupWise system, because I migrated a GroupWise system yesterday that was 7 gigs, and I
Yeah,
migrated one last week that was 480 gigs.
right.
So
Depends on your retention
it
policies,
really
right? So
depends on your retention policies. As far as memory, that's also a little bit up in the air as to what you have, but I usually start at about 4 gigs, and depending on the server, have to up it from there.
right, and remember now that the GroupWise with 2014 will be a 64-bit application, so it will take advantage of the RAM you have, as compared to when it was a 32-bit application. So
Right.
I'm going to say sometimes the
Um,
more the merrier. But
Paul,
it
what are
really
your
isn't.
thoughts on zapping the client?
Zav the client works fine. Um, I have not done it with 2014 yet, but I had done it with 2012. So you can get it down to an executable, so which makes it even easier to deliver to the desktop via a desktop management software, because you're delivering really one file to the workstation. So yeah, it's definitely doable. Now we actually, I know we did at one point supply the template for it within the Zav environment. So I haven't played with it in a little bit though, but I definitely have seen it done. And right, so I'm gonna turn on. So I'm actually going to use 2 different workstations. Okay, I'm going to power this one on. Actually, no, I can do this all with one. I'm going to save some RAM, because I've got 8 gigabyte machine, and I got 4 gig allocated for the ZCM server and 2 gig allocated to the Windows box, so that's 6. If I open up my XP box, which has got a gig allocated, that gives me not a whole bunch left. So we'll just do this with one box.
I had another question. In my opinion, is Linux better than Windows? And I hate to be a Windows hater here, but absolutely, Linux is better than Windows. Can you run GroupWise on a Windows server and be happy with it? Sure. You just have to give it a little more guts. Um, I always tell people I do not know if that's because Linux is just inherently better than Windows, although, I like to think so, or if it's just that, Novell optimizes things better for their own their own OS than for Windows.
Well,
But I have
but
definitely seen
NTFS,
issues with Windows.
right? But we all know that NTFS just fights, right? NTFS is not the most efficient file system, so it causes lots of overhead, um, lots of grief. There are certain things you can do to tune it. I know that I know Mr. Ed Hanley is on the line. I know he's got some documentation that he has for helping to tune a Windows server to get the best performance out of it. And Ed is from Novell Consulting, so great guy and publishes some of his own documents. So
I have a couple of other questions. What about NSS volumes on Linux? This is Paul and I were just discussing that this morning. It's kind of funny that you asked this question. This is one of
you
those
know,
questions that it's like six of one, half a dozen of another. It depends on who you talk to, right? I don't think
yeah,
the actual GroupWise engineers have any great preference one way or the other. It depends on what you're doing. If you're clustering, you're going to want NSS, right? I was just mentioning that last year I did 47 GroupWise upgrades. Of them, only about 5 of them were OES, and of the 5 OES, one of them wanted to run on ext3. So it there are definitely some benefits to NSS if it is, especially if you're just coming from NetWare, you just feel comfortable with NSS, right? You understand rights, you feel like you have control over everything, but the overhead also can be more taxing, just the overhead for NSS on Linux. So it's one of those things that we seem to go back and forth about, and there's really no, I think, definitive answer on whether or not NSS or ext3 are better. It's really going to come down to what are you comfortable with and what do you want to run your system on.
and I think part of the argument for NSS was that, well, it made it easy for you to connect with a Windows workstation to get a map drive to a domain so that you can manage with Console One. Whereas now with GroupWise 2014, that's a non-issue, right?
Right.
You no longer need the Windows, you no longer need the Novell client, you no longer need NCP to connect up. Everything's through web browser. So a lot of those things that really, maybe made it easier for you from the management perspective, no longer hold true. So, as far, so do I really need an OES server to run GroupWise? I'm in a small shop that's going to have the server multitask and do multiple, if it's going to run GroupWise, it's going to run iPrint, it's going to do some things. Yeah, I go NSS in a heartbeat. If I'm going to be in an environment where the server's typically going to do GroupWise related tasks only and no other service, I'm going sleds. That's just my personal take on it. I mean, it's so ext3 is where I'm going to go with it.
Yeah.
So,
A couple of
so
client questions, real quick, while we're waiting. A couple on the installation. If you send someone this link in their email and they launch it and they download it and try to launch it while GroupWise is up, in my experience, it's told you need to close GroupWise. But have you run into any problems with that, Paul?
no, no. Well, part of the directives I would issue would be, close down GroupWise and then run this, like save it locally, close GroupWise, and then run it locally. Also, part of the issue is the user, do they have administrator rights to the box? So if they don't, it's a non-starter. You cannot use setup IP to do this, right? If users
Right,
do
because
not,
it's the
you
same
can't
as
even use
doing
auto
it through
update,
auto.
right?
You can't do auto update or setup IP if users are not local
Right.
administrators.
So part of the benefits of using setup IP, again, is there's actually a tool out there, and I refer to it as Tommy's tool. He just likes it when I call it that. And that there's a tool called Easy Install, which is written by Tommy Mickelson, which is a wrapper that will, so you run this application, point to your existing setupip.exe file. It will then ask you for the administrator name and password, and then regenerate a setupip.exe that has that embedded in it. So obviously, as long as every workstation has the same, administrator name and password, It then runs the setup IP as, it's like basically doing a run as administrator with that tool, with that application. So I, definitely have done that before in an environment where I know the users do not have uh, the proper rights to the box. If they're just part of the users group, they won't be able to do the upgrade unless you're using either Tommy's tool or something like the ZCM to push it.
One other question on client install is, after it started the install and it was giving you the status bar, there was an X on the box. And can users actually exit out of that during the middle of the installation, or is that just an artifact?
No, they actually can. It doesn't have the mechanism in there to turn that one off. It's a show the progress box. It doesn't disable the ability to cancel out of it. And if they do cancel out, it will probably bork the client pretty good. I do know it is possible. I have to look it up. In GroupWise 2012, there actually is a different way of installing. We're going to actually use this, and we're probably going to see this now. We actually have a new batch file called install.bat, and in that batch file, when we use a switch called the unattended switch, it actually will not even give the user the ability to cancel out. So I don't know what the developer did. He's called some other switches within that batch file to revoke the ability to actually cancel out. Then I got to investigate and see if there's a way to do that as well. But yeah, unfortunately they can. But when I do this ZCM way, if they've held things consistent from GroupWise 2012, we should not be able to cancel out of the install from ZCM. All right. I'm ready to go. So do you have any other questions, or do you want me to go?
You can go ahead now. There's just one or two more, but they can be handled in a minute.
All right. So I'm just, obviously so if you're not familiar with ZCM is ZenWorks Configuration Management. It is a tool that allows us to manage desktops, allows us to push applications to, allows us to re-image pieces of software, those kind of things. So down here in the right-hand side, there's this little agent called the ZenWorks agent, so the ZenWorks Adaptive Agent. If I right mouse on it, I look at the properties of it here. It'll show up in a sec. And so for this particular workstation, it'll show me, its name of the workstation, the zone that it's in for ZCM. So some management stuff here. If I look on the left hand, here's bundles. So what application bundles are assigned to this workstation? And you can assign bundles to users or or basically devices, right? So depending on how you do this, if you assign things to users, that means the software will follow the user no matter what workstation they actually work at or what device they work from. So I'm just going to minimize this thing here. So I'm going to launch this link here that's going to take me to the ZenWorks Control Center, which is the management tool for ZCM. I'm going to log in as administrator, my super secret funky novel password, N0V3LL, right? It's going to log me in here. So if I take a look, first thing I'll look at here, let me go to my devices just to show you that I have a series of workstations that are managed by this environment. So on my workstations, I should have the 3 workstations. So I've got a Windows 7 box, a Windows 8 box, and a Windows XP box. So these 3 VMs that I have available to me are available. So to create the bundle, pretty straightforward. I'm going to go to bundles, and I can create bundle folders for management, all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to simply just go and say I want to create a new bundle. I am going to call this a Windows bundle because it's pushing to Windows. So ZCM has the ability to send bundles to Linux devices, Macintosh devices, and Windows bundles. The pre-boot bundle is for doing imaging. So if you get brand new equipment that comes in, you can say, hey, I want to, as this machine turns on for the very first time, pick an element within that machine and say, you know what, put this image down on it so it'll install Windows, reboot, go through a sysprep process, configure the hardware, all that kind of stuff. It can do all that for you. So it's some pretty cool stuff in there. So we'll create a Windows bundle. We have some pre-type or some bundles that are predefined. I'm really going to create an empty bundle because I want to define all of its attributes. So I'm going to leave it as an empty bundle. I give it a bundle name, GroupWise 2014. Icon. So they've provided an icon. Oh, you know what? I need to actually use IE for this. Sorry about that. I needed to use IE because I don't have the snap-ins installed so I was using Firefox. I just don't have the snap-ins involved to allow me to pick multiple files within that. There we go. And again, this is the same. Because when I created the VM, I installed the snap-ins to IE, but I forgot to install them to Firefox. So again, a new bundle, a Windows bundle, an empty bundle. We'll call it GroupWise 2014, and icon. So we've provided an icon, and if I go to my shared folders here, I've got so in the actual, when you download the file, and here is my client Windows Multi, my zip file, and I extract it. So in the GroupWise client Win32 folder, there actually is an icon file called GroupWise 2014. Right, so I can take that. Whoops, I'm just going to grab that file, open that, and click OK. It's now going to take that and it's going to upload that into the ZenWorks environment. So on the ZenWorks server, it has what's called a content repository. It's going to upload that and make it available to every workstation. Right, so I'm going to put a description here: GroupWise 2014 Windows Client. Spelling counts. Select next, and here what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this as a sandbox version. So it's basically a temporary holding bin so that it doesn't accidentally get deployed to all the workstations that are associated with this bundle. Even though right now there's no files associated with it, I always just, that's precautionary. I don't want it to go down to all of them. So I'm going to click finish. I have defined other additional properties, so it's going to open up that application. So I'm in the bundles, 2014 bundle, the sandbox version. Yes, I'm not ready to publish it for general use. So there's several tabs across the top. I'm interested in the install tab. So for the installation, really what this is basically getting the files to the box and installing them. We call it install. So it's called an action. So I want to create an install action, right? That is going to allow me to go ahead and copy files to the distribution directory. Another thing we can do, and before I go forward here, is we also are going to leverage that install.bat file. So if I just minimize this and let's go back here. If I look at my shared exercises, GroupWise 2014. So if I look at the client Win32 folder, there actually is this file called install.bat. I know it's a batch file here. Oops, I don't want to run it. I want to edit. Yeah, okay, sorry. So this batch file is going to be leveraged, and in here, what it does, and it's obviously lots of stuff in here. We have some switches that we can use during the install: /silent, /unattended, /manual, right? The /manually allows the user to answer questions. The /unattended, user doesn't get to ask questions, those kind of things. We've got some environmental variables, GW install transform file, which allows us to use an MST file. So part of the issue with the running the GroupWise installer, or running setup.exe, even though we say GroupWise is an MSI, the problem with running it as a setup.exe is that it didn't allow us to infuse an MST file to it. So we really couldn't do that really well, because during the install, the setup.exe actually goes through a whole bunch of prerequisite tests to see if things are installed on the workstation, like MSXML, VC runtimes, MAPI32. It does a whole bunch of checks to see that other software is there first before it actually goes in and installs the MSI. Well, this install.bat excuse me, does the same thing, except it also, at the very end, really truly does run the MSI. Here's the check, the pre-install, the prerequisites. So a whole bunch of things in here, and really I don't want you touching this file, but what it really is looking for is it's going to allow us to pass an MST file, which really means I can do what? Well, under the GroupWise admin utility, under this tools, we actually have a utility called GW Tuner. And the GW Tuner, if I run that, allows us to create the MST file, the Microsoft Transform file, for the Windows installer. So this is actually kind of pretty cool. So all I need to do is point to my GroupWise directory. So I'm just going to go back to that. So the GroupWise, you actually point to the client directory. So it needs the contents of the client directory. And it says, okay, where's the path to install the client? What folder do you want it in? Where do you want the icons on the desktop? Now, this is, different philosophies. Desktop management allows you to configure, allows you to manage where and when users have access to applications. So again, we may not want the application to install the icons. We may want them to be ZenWorks delivered only, right? So in that case here, if I say I don't want them to add it to desktop and to the start menu, all I want to see is the icon from ZenWorks delivered applications, and I'm going to do it that way. So this icon here with the black arrow on the icon says it's an application delivered. That will then change. It will become a red letter Z or Z, depending on which side of the border you're on. So obviously I still want to have the internet browser, so the Mail 2. My language of installation, right, because I have all the languages available to me. Again, for GroupWise 2014, if you have not heard, it will be available in the multi-language only, so there will be no English-only version. They've done away with that, so it just makes it easier for them to compile the code as a multi-language pack. Select Next, the default language, English. Notice it did not ask me about document management, right? Document management no longer supported in GroupWise 2014. If you have document management, you're using it, it will carry forward when you do upgrades, though access will be limited in terms of management from, you'll have to keep a copy of Console 1 around to manage that environment. So a little bit of a heads up for that. So it created a transform file, and if I go back into the GroupWise client Win32, I should see a GroupWise MST file here. So that just got created on the 12th today, right? So there it is. So I've got that file available to me now to do the install. If I go back to here, so things I want to do, I can create a prompt. So I can say a prompt user. So the first thing I want to have is a prompt that's going to say, hey, oh, you're going to install GroupWise 2012, or 2014, sorry. Did I actually select it, or did not? Maybe prompt user. Okay. It's working. There we go. Prompt user for GW 2014 install. So I just give it a little bit of a better descriptive name. Here, user can cancel, yes or no. If it's set to 0, they'll no cancel button for the user, so they'll see the dialog box. If they do present them with a dialog box, display it for 30 seconds and then continue on. The user has the option to acknowledge um, the prompt, and here's I'm going to define a prompt. The GroupWise 2014 client is about to be installed. This may take up to 10 minutes. Please be patient. All right, so, and again, spelling does count. I can spell, I just can't type. And those of you who know me can attest to that. Click OK, straightforward. And now click OK, and there's my first action. So now the second action is, okay, I want to install some files. So these are files that I'm going to want to have installed to the local machine, because in a ZenWorks environment, the installs are always done locally. So I want to make sure that I have a place to put the files. You can do some from the server, but it's typically better to do the installs locally. Install files to a temp location. Right, so I'm going to add some files. And here it's kind of, I say add a second time, and then I got to say add a third time. A little kind of funny in its architecture. Add, and I'm going to go back to, well, what files do I really need? So if I go to my GroupWise, admin, utility, setup IP, so I really need the setup IP files, so I want to have what languages? Well, I need to have my setup IP, I want the English language. I need the setup IP.fill file. And I need this extract setup IP packs batch file. It's actually a command file, CMD. So if you were familiar with doing this with GroupWise 2012, they actually renamed the file from extract.bat to extract setup IP packs CMD. All right, so I'm going to say those three files. When I click OK, it's going to upload the files to the ZenWorks server so that every workstation that has a management agent has access to them, and then they will have access and be able to download them. Here I have the option, do I want to compress the files as it stores it on the server? I'm not going to compress them because the setup IP.fill file is a compressed file already. So I'm just going to click OK. It tells me that's going to upload these three files to the ZenWorks server. That's fine. Go ahead and do that. And that is about 100 megabytes worth of data. The setup IP file, the setup.en file, and the extract setup IP packs. So now it's uploading that file. Once it's done, I'm going to click OK. So it's got the three files there. It says destination directory. Where do you want to put them? So this is that temporary directory. So I'm going to do C:/, well, it is the GroupWise client, so I create a folder called GW client. I click OK. Now here, the default here is executable security level. So this is where we said, well, if the user is not part of the administrator group on the local machine, he's going to have an issue trying to install it. So here I can say run as a secure system user. And I can leave it at that one, or I can say run as a dynamic administrator. So it'll create a session. And I typically use dynamic administrator, but either one, run as secure system or run as dynamic, will work. If you run as a dynamic administrator, you can actually select credentials of a specific user account to install, especially if you're in an Active Directory environment. You can do that as well. Click OK. So now I've got the files there. So once it installs those files, my next action is going to be I'm going to run a script, right? I want to go ahead and extract the files from the, to extract the install files, right? So the script name is going to be C:/ in my GW client folder / extract setup IP oops, setup IP packs.cmd. Right, so that's the name of the file, extract setup IP packs. No specific parameters are needed. Now here, one thing I want to do is just wait before proceeding to the next action. So right now, if this is my third action, I am going to have a fourth action, but I want to wait until this action is completed. Wait till you finish extracting all of the files before you move to the next step. Then also, I want to run this as dynamic administrator. So on the advanced tab, I say run as dynamic administrator. I click OK. As soon as I start playing with a lot of VMs and opening and closing in and having some little bit of a lag. So there's 3 actions. Now, so this is going to give me all of the files that I need on the local machine extracted and basically ready to do the install. But before I do the install, I have to do one more thing. I went and created that MST file. So now I need to put that MST file into the environment so that it can be used. So I'm going to do another install file option here. Install GroupWise MST file. Oops. So I'm going to add that file in. So add a file, and so that is in the GroupWise client Win32, where it created it, right? So GroupWise MST. This one, it's a 4K file, so do I really care about compression on it? Not really. So I'm going to add that in. It's going to upload it to the server. And again, where do I want to put this? C:\GW client. So now, when I run the script to extract the files, guess what it does? It creates a directory called Win32 and puts all of the files to do the install in the Win32 directory, just like it does in, because the old software distribution directory, the Win32 folder, or on the download, the Win32 folder, it's going to do exactly that. So I want to do that. So I want to infuse the GroupWise MST file into that Win32 folder. And again, I want to run this as dynamic administrator. So make sure that, I'm doing this, somebody who's got rights to the box. Now I'm ready to do the install. So the next action is going to go ahead and actually do the install. So I'm going to run, so I'm going to do a launch executable. Right? So the executable is basically just going to do the batch file. So launch executable to install or upgrade, because you can actually use this to do a straight install or to upgrade an existing environment. So the command here is going to be on my C:\GW client /Win32. We are going to run that install.bat file that I showed you earlier. So we're not going to run the setup.exe. We're going to run the batch file. And the batch file will do the test of all the prerequisites, and then it will allow me to pass the GroupWise MST file to the MSI. It'll also allow me to do a couple of things. It'll allow me to uninstall the old client and install the new client with changes. The problem, or one of the issues with Windows MSIs, is that if you try to do upgrades, it actually respects the initial install and does not allow you to make changes to it, even if I use an MST file. So what this allows us to do is remove the old install and push down a new one. But in order to do that, I'm going to actually add a couple of environmental variables. So here, first thing I need to do is, when they were developing this, I was actually heavily involved with this, and initially the developer hard-coded the name of the MST file into the install.bat file. And I said, well, I don't really want to do that. I'd rather have different MST files for different types of installs. So he created a variable called GWINST transform. I got a transform file GWINST transform file, and we just now sell it. Well, what's the name of the MST file? So this way allows you to maintain multiple different versions of the MST file without editing the install.bat file. So, because we really didn't want anybody to touch that. And then the second environmental variable I'm going to add is for the ability to remove the old client is GWINST remove MSI, and the value is true. That means we have the ability to remove an older install before we install the new one. So those two are at the very least, the most important one is the MST file if you're going to use MST files. If not, then the removing MSI is not an issue as well. Command line parameters. Now we have a couple of options. Again, /silent would say show no dialog boxes at all. I'm not a big fan of this one only because as the client is being installed down to the workstation, the workstation will take a performance hit. Obviously, it's doing something in the background, so if users are trying to do something in the foreground, they'll still notice a performance hit, and they might reboot. They might do something. So if you don't let them know that something's going on, we are going to give them the prompt to say that the client is going to be installed. So, but they might forget because they're clients. There's unattended, and it's not unattend as I think Microsoft's verbiage is. It's unattended with the added ed. And this one says, show me the dialog boxes, but no interaction to them. And there also was that /manual, which says, okay, allow the questions to be asked. So if I do unattended, that one actually shows me the dialog boxes. So I'm going to leave it at that one. I am going to hit the advanced option here because I want to wait for this. I want to wait for the install to finish before it goes forward. And again, run this as the dynamic administrator. Click OK. So there are my 5 actions for getting the client installed. When I created my MST file, I said, don't give me any icons. So now I'm going to have an issue. I'm not going to have any icons. I'm not going to have anything anywhere. So what I need to do is I'm going to create another action, but under the launch action. So this will allow me to have a single icon on the desktop for installing and also for launching the client. So I'm just going to create a launch action, a launch executable, right, which will be launch, the GroupWise client. And so my command here is going to be C://, and there actually is a variable. And I want to make sure I have this. Yeah. Okay. So it's not C:/, sorry. If I do a variable, and if I do program files 32. So what this will do is now, depending on the architecture of the box, if it's a 32-bit box, it goes to program files. If it's a 64-bit box, it's going to go to program files x86. So that variable allows it to say, so if it's a 32-bit application, it's going to go into 32-bit. So GroupWise does get installed to program files on a 32-bit box and program files x86 on a 64-bit box. So by using that variable, it now allows me to go to either one of those type of applications. I don't have to have 2 different applications based on each one of those platforms, right? So so here, and it's going to be Novell, GroupWise, grpwise.exe. Some command line parameters. Well, I like to use /@u- to show me the login dialog box every time. At this point, I can populate, say, /IPA for the address to be da-oes.digitalairlines.com, and I want the /IPP port, excuse me, to be IPP, sorry, to be 1677. So it allows me to pre-populate those lines as they come up. Here, I want to run it. I don't need to wait for anything else to happen. Here, I want to run it as the logged in user, right? I want it to be the regular user credentials, so that's fine. And I'm just going to make sure that I've got the path spelt correctly, because sometimes in my haste, I spell things wrong. And so by doing this, clicking OK, and now I'm done. So I'm going to click Apply. So that's going to create all of the actions. And so there's my actions, there's my launch. If I go to my summary screen for this application, for this bundle, it then shows me a summary of what it's going to do. Right, so there's my icon it's going to distribute. A couple of things. Now I need to associate. So it's called relationships. So I'm going to add this to my workstation. So I can say add that to my Windows 7 box, my Windows XP box, and my Windows. So all three platforms at this point. Where do I want the icon to show up? I say show it on the desktop, show it on the start menu, quick launch if it's Windows XP. There's an application viewer window for ZenWorks. I click on next. When do I want? I want to set, do I have any schedule for availability? I'm going to say let's create a distribution schedule. I am going to say, when do I want this? I want this to distribute it immediately. And I'm going to say, once it distributes, and distribute means getting the application to the workstation. So every workstation, sorry, has what's called an application cache. So what it does is it actually copies all of the files for doing an installation to this cached location on the workstation. And then from the cache location, it goes in and starts the install. So that distribution is really the caching portion, and then the installation part is when it actually goes through the install. So I want it to install immediately after the distribution, and then I want it to launch immediately after the installation is finished. So I'm setting up a schedule here of when do I want this to happen. I click Next, and I'm going to click Finish. And so when this is done, I now have the availability of that. So, but this is still a sandbox version. The sandbox version means it's still under testing. It's not available to any workstation yet. To make it available to workstations, I need to publish it. So I'm going to click on the Publish button and just click Finish, publishing it as a new version. And now, if I actually look at my workstation, if I go to my bundles, I don't see anything here. Right, still, because it's not. I said publish it right away, but sometimes the workstation has to refresh its agent. The communication between the server and the workstation isn't always instantaneous. So I'm going to refresh, and we'll see that it's now polling, going up to the server. Once it recognizes that it does have the association, it will then distribute that application. Right, so it sees it here. Just going to minimize that. And there's my application. If I actually, so it's got the X on it, since it's not available. It's got the red letter Z, right, or Z. And again, it's usually just timing issues here. Now, if I want to, force the issue, I can refresh again, and at that point, it should actually launch the install. Unless I've done something wrong, because sometimes when I do the demos, then I type stuff wrong. Let's do.
I just have to say, we have a great crowd here, you guys. I'm so happy that so many of you have stuck this out. It's gone a lot longer than we had originally intended, but
Right. So a failure. So something's going. So I actually typed something wrong someplace, and that's typical. That's why you have it as a sandbox version to do the testing, right? And obviously, let's go to my actions. We're having a little bit of a lag here. I just need to check. It's actually not. It's trying to download, but it's failing. So I either typed something wrong.
I have a quick question I can answer here while we're looking at
Sure.
this. Someone asked if there's a new TSA for GroupWise 2014, and to my knowledge, there is not yet a new TSA. Whether a new one will be coming, I don't know. The GW TSA. Um, Novell recommends typically that you just use the standard TSA that comes with, for any OES application, but um, there's not a specific GroupWise one coming with this version. And
Just
someone
making
asked
sure.
Paul, and this maybe I'll just throw this out there, but it's something you'll have to think about for a minute, I think, while you're looking, and I don't want to interrupt you. But it was, why do you prefer this method rather than just an install MSI setup with an attached MST file? Well, as I think we can see, there's a lot of steps Paul's putting into this that would be a little more than just running an MST, but
Right. Well, because it also does. Because if I just do the MSI, it doesn't do any of the prerequisite checks. Right. You don't get to see if it checks for the MSXML. If you're doing an upgrade, not really necessarily a big issue. But if you're doing a fresh install, it'll be an issue because if you don't have MAPI 32 installed, if you don't have VC runtimes, if you don't have MSXML, there's like 5 different applications that it looks for to see if they're there first. Client extract setup IP packs. Right. Da, da, da. Colon. Because usually sometimes what happens here is I end up with a semicolon instead of a colon, and they made it really hard to see without putting on magnifying glasses. Or is that just me getting older? GW client, right? Install the files. I want to make sure that they're being downloaded to a colon, and a colon. Okay, GW client, yeah. So that's all good. Install, add the file. Just double check. GW client. And sometimes I spell client wrong. I inverse the letters, end up in different directories. I'm going to apply that. Publish. So now it should go to a different version of the software. So every time you publish, it updates the version number. And if I look at my properties, so it's at version 0. So if I refresh, it should increment the version number to 1. Oops, I want a progress bar. Now it's downloading. Okay. I don't recognize what I did differently than before. So if I look at the progress, it's showing it's downloading. So that's actually downloading to the cache on the local machine. Once it finishes the downloading of the cache, it then will proceed to install it. And there's 5 steps, right, on the install. You see the 5 steps, and you'll see it go installing step 1, step 2, step 3. So I don't know why it didn't work before, because I didn't really change anything other than hit the apply button again. What also could have been, if I look at the settings here, you actually have to have the application as being available. And if I go too fast, sometimes if this wasn't the status is available, it'll fail in its download as well. So that could have been the issue as well. Sometimes it's just a timing issue, right? So as you create the bundle, it's got to store things up on the server, and then it's got to replicate that through the system. And so until it gets the flag as available, it might not have done that. So, I mean, it's a simple application. It's not really not. It's 100. So there's installing one of. There's my prompt. So let me just get rid of this here. So there's the prompt. Again, that'll stay there for 30 seconds. I click OK. And then if I go to, let me see, If I go to the file system here, we can catch it. It should create, there's a GW client folder. It's got the files. It's extracting them. Right? There's the fill temp file, so it's extracting them into Win32. We'll see that grow. Right? You also have the option of that is I could have said remove these files. I could have created another action at the very end that says remove the files once it's installed so that they don't stay there on the local machine. Again, so now it's extracting some files and doing some things. It's whatever it's going to do. I said to do it in unattended, so at one point, once the GroupWise MSI actually starts, so notice the icon has changed here to this little green arrow. That means it's actually installing. So it's going to installing that. There's like the 5 installation steps, so it's in those ones. So one of the first things that'll happen, this will take about 10 minutes to do. This icon will eventually disappear, and the new icon, well, it's already there, but that icon will disappear. Again, some new things going on with the new client. So it's installing this redistributable C++ thing. So again, the GroupWise 2014 client doing a few things a little different than it did with the earlier versions. So again, because I said unattended, we're seeing these screens. If I said silent, we wouldn't see these screens. If you do a silent install, one of the things that we can go to here, if I look back at the bundle under the summary, there's actually a show bundle activity. It's defaulted to no. If I say yes to that, so if I want to, I could actually have, don't show, use the /silent, but then what happens is ZenWorks will have a pop-up window that says installing an application so that the user knows that something is going on, right? Again, because there will be a performance hit on the box. All right, so we're going to have to sit here and wait. So are there any other questions, Nina, as they're coming in? Am I still on? All right, Danita, you there?
I was muted. I'm talking to myself. That's how that goes.
Okay. I'm just worried about I'm just checking, okay, my stuff, I'm looking at my stuff. Did my stuff go off? And I've been talking to myself for the last 40 minutes.
No, I had myself muted. Um, we've had primarily just a lot of people chiming in about what could have been wrong with your installation, and so we got you back together. We have a lot
Okay.
of comments that this was a great information, and I agree. Paul does. I've never sat through a presentation that Paul does and not learned something myself. So it's always good stuff to have him presenting for us. I just have to say thank you guys. I mean, we've had very few people drop off of this webinar, even though we've almost gone 2 hours now. So you've been very diligent in sticking around, and I know it was very interesting information, and that's one of the reasons why you stuck with us. Let's see. I don't see any specific questions. Oh, Lawrence Carney's asking about the cross-platform client. Even though it's older, can ZCM be used to distribute the cross-platform client to other platforms? Um, uh,
It's an RPM, so yes. You
yeah,
can
so
use
yeah, you can use it.
CCM to deliver the GroupWise 8 RPM. Yes, you can.
What about the Mac client stuff?
I'm going to say I don't know enough about the Mac distribution side to say yes to that.
Okay. Someone asked, yeah, there will be a recording of this webinar, and I do have a YouTube channel. YouTube, I have to go check and see what it is. Caledonia Net is the end of it, but I will send out an email to all of the participants on this webinar, and plus, I mean, because it's a public webinar, so I'll be sending out information on how you can get back to view this again, because it is a lot of information. and it's something I'm sure you'll probably want to look at a couple of times as you're going through your install to be able to figure it all out.
Right. And
Um,
we actually already have this as a video already on our member site.
yes, we do.
So
So if you're a member, we have just a video that's just the ZCM portion, so you don't have to go and hunt it down in this long webinar. But I think it's been just a great webinar, and Paul did a wonderful job. Um,
except for that first little part, but stuff happens.
yeah.
Yeah, and I really am going to blame my VMs because I have not been able to figure out why the POA distribution is not happening. It works in my production environment because I've tested every way in my production environment, and I don't know if it has to do with it's a DNS issue or if it's a IP issue that I'm having with the because I actually did find here's a little tidbit for you guys with this with GroupWise 2014. Um, if and I can no, I can't really show you this. I can on your Linux servers. If you go to Yast, and if I go to my network services, sorry, network devices, and go get my network card, I've been doing something is enabling the NIC to use or DHCP to use the local host. If I edit this and go to, oops. Sorry, I don't want to edit this. I just want to go to hostname DNS. So right here, assign hostname to loopback IP. All right. If you do that, you will never be able to install an additional domain or post office connecting to, like if right now, if my primary domain is on this box, I would never be able to connect to it. It's an issue that we discovered last week. And I don't know if they're going to fix it. They don't know if they're going to have time to or what they're going to do. They might just document it. If I take this away, and here's a way to test that. I know it's a little off topic as we wait for that install to happen, but op novell GroupWise admin, oops, GroupWise. Oh, the GroupWise isn't on this box. Sorry, I can't do that. I can't show you because it's on my OES box, which is actually shut. What's happening is it ends up being the first. It actually binds 127.0.0.2, right? And so that, and it actually listens, and it's looking for that IP address, which is obviously non-routable, so it doesn't find it. It would look locally. So if I was trying to install on another box, trying to connect back to the primary domain, it never connects, and it's because of that loopback. Take away that loopback, restart your administrative services, and then everything is fine. It's one of those things that we came across, and I was talking to the developer, and he went, "Oh." So it's one of those things that they are going to study the impact on who they think it would impact, whether they're
we
going to
test these
fix it
crazy
or not.
things so you don't have
So
to.
yeah, yeah, it's one of those because I was trying to do something and it wouldn't, and we're on a beta call last week, right? So right after the beta call, the developer dialed into my system and we looked at it and we figured it out, but it took us a while. But it was like kind of one of those things. Let's go back to here, see what's going on. It's still installing, but notice that the icon is now gone. And I do have that launch, so I did tell it to install immediately and then launch immediately. So once it's ready, it's going to launch the GroupWise client. So it's still installing because I see the icon. Once it's finished the install, this little green arrow on the icon will disappear, and it'll just be the icon itself with the red Z or Z. Because I'm from north of the 49th parallel, I say Z. You guys on the other side say Z.
I say Z, you say Z.
Tomato, tomato. Right? That's the only
Okay,
time I
do
ever
we
got.
have any other questions, folks?
And my French Canadian background has me say the letter H funny, apparently.
That's correct. You know, what I'm going to do is for the drawing, a couple of people have dropped off the call, and normally I didn't say you have to be here to win. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the list of everyone who attended. We had over 100 people registered for the webinar, and about 70 people ended up attending. And I'm definitely going to award our little prize to someone who was here. So what I will do is, after this is over, I can't see the total attendee list until we close out the webinar, but I will um, do my random drawing from people who were actually present and not those who didn't attend. But I don't want to penalize people who dropped off simply because we did go really long, and I want everybody to have a chance at that.
So it actually still hadn't even gotten to the fifth. It's still installing. So it does take a while to install because it has to remove the old client and then. But and what the nice things about this one is using the install.bat, it actually does a backup of all of the registry entries for the client, so for configuration, so that it maintains the configuration of the client. So the users, if they've added, columns to their address books and all those kind of things, everything is maintained. Um, Also, a little tidbit is upgrading to GroupWise 2014 client. There are some changes in the client in terms of address books, in terms of name completion, because we no longer really we use relevance for names. Um, so what that means is, as you start typing letters, it actually looks at all of the words that contain those letters, so it's the relevance. You can pick the order of the address books in terms of the ones you want them to search in, much like it was for name completion before. Um, but so um, so it's a little different in how it actually works for the name completion. So it actually maintains some of those things based on the first upgrade you do. So in my case here, I use multiple laptops to log into my regular client, but it will maintain the configuration from the first GroupWise 2012 database it touches as you launch the GroupWise 2014 client. So you got to be a little careful with that. So again, notice it's going through the install. No dialog boxes other than the unattended, right? So I said slash unattended. We'll see some of the other dialog boxes because that's still extracting. But I'm pretty sure that we won't have access to the cancel button like we do with the auto update and setup IP. So it's a little different how the developers managed to do that. Oh, and there it's done. So there really wasn't a whole lot. And if I have actually nothing to log in here.
Right,
Let me just,
our server's not up. Um,
I need to,
we
I
had
need to
one
just,
little off-topic question about the Mac client, and Novell doesn't have a planned update to the Mac client right now. There are a couple things in the works. Daniel Shelley of Ghost Pattern Software, he's the guy who writes the iOS and the Android front end for web access. He has a Mac version of that in the works, but it is just a front end for web access, but it still gives you something to, use as a client on your Mac. There's also Touchdown by NitroDesk, which is an active sync client for the Mac, but it would have the limitations you would have that you've made for your phones, like how many days you can download and the size of your attachments. So you would probably have to do some modifications of your mobility server if you really wanted to use it as a full-blown client. But the Mavericks Apple Sync that was added by Apple is Active Sync version 14, I believe, and is not quite ready yet for mobility. I mean, mobility is not quite ready yet for it, but that will also be a possibility once Active Sync on mobility gets up to 14. So there are some things available for Macs, but we're not really there yet, and I'm a Mac user. Most people know that. And so I grumble as much as anybody else. And
sometimes more.
the address
Well, that
book
hit it.
is quite a bit different. Yeah, the address book has changed a bit in 2012, in 2014. Um, is the code revised? I mean, it's the same idea, but there's quite a bit going on with it as far as how it does various things. For example, the frequent contacts book has been fixed to actually discard addresses that bounce. So that was one of the biggest reasons why most people didn't use the frequent contacts book. And there's some new tweaks and bells and whistles for the address book, but it's not dramatically different than 2012, which was already a fairly big difference from GroupWise 8, but it does have definitely some tweaks and changes to it. Okay.
So
Um,
the GroupWise server's coming up, so we'll be able to log in
I
a
think
sec.
Paul was going to verify that he actually did get a good install of GroupWise 2014, and then we'll be done. So I really do thank you all for not only coming to the webinar today, but those of you who stuck it out. I mean, um, I really appreciate that. I know that, it's like you got a 2-hour GroupWise uh, class today, and I think that was pretty cool that we're able to do that and get so many people involved in some ongoing GroupWise information. May not be totally up yet, Paul. You think your server boots
Yeah,
that fast?
yeah. Sure, it's a Linux box. And there's my security keys, and voila. And that's definitely Windermere. So,
Yep. That brings up a good point. Like
dun,
Paul
dun, dun,
said, if you
dun.
haven't seen some of the installation yet, um, if you install a brand new system on GroupWise, it automatically creates certificates for all of your agents, and so they are self-signed. So users who would then log into their clients, unless you go in and disable it before you launch, they would get the certificate, and since it's self-signed, they would get the little thing, "Do you trust it?" kind of a deal. But that's on new installations that it creates all these certificates for everything. All right, folks, unless we have other big questions, I am going to uh, call this one done, and we'll see you. Those of you who are on the membership, we'll see you next week. We've got we were going to do
Upgrade.
LDAP next week, but Paul has a conflict and he's doing the LDAP, so I'm going to do a GroupWise 2014 upgrade next week on our webinar, and we'll be sending out information on all of that. So I want you to have a great rest of the week, and hopefully we'll see you around next week, and enjoy your GroupWise.